So I'm here with Rebekah King. She is an award-winning playwright, and I wanted to do this feature for Screen Queens and have Rebekah on because she is one of our women in horror. Now, this isn't necessarily people who write horror fiction, but if you've read any of a work of fiction, you'll know that I'm a massive horror fan. And I wanted to interview Rebekah because why would I not want to interview Rebekah? She has a PhD in English, exploring the depiction of magic on the early modern stage, which I thought sounded really cool. And she focuses on horror moments on her Substack. So I am delighted to catch up with Rebekah this month and interview her for Screen Queens Women in Horror. So hello, Rebekah, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. And it's a real honor to be a Scream Queen, one of your Scream Queens. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So, we start off with Rebekah. Where in the world are you from?
I am from right in the middle of England, near Northampton was where I grew up, and my family we're all Midlanders really, from Northamptonshire and East Anglia, Lincolnshire, um, Norfolk, that kind of area, I think, Norwich, um, historically. So very kind of middle of the country, middle of the countryside, pretty ordinary, actually, nothing too exciting. Although the county that I grew up in is a witch hunting county. So we've got that going for us. Shoes and witches is what Northamptonshire was known for.
Shoes and witches. Wow. Okay, that is interesting. Right in the middle of the country. So you're a playwright, and can you remember the pivotal moment that sparked your interest in theatre?
Yeah, it's really hard to say which specific moment it would have been. So I did my undergraduate at Warwick, and that was in English literature. And when I was there, I started working at the Warwick Arts Centre, which is one of the biggest. I think it's the biggest arts centre outside London, and another Midlands place. And it was one venue, but it had all sorts of different types of venues in the same building. So there was a big concert hall where operas would come and tour, and there was little scrappy, strange galleries, and there was a cinema. All sorts of art, all sorts of theatre was being produced there, from the very grand to the very weird and experimental. There was one where the stewards had to sit on a button because the performance had to be completely in pitch black. But for fire safety reasons, we had to have this dead man switch where if we let go of it, all the lights immediately came back on. So a steward had to sit on a button, and we were told if you move, you'll ruin the performance. There's all sorts of strange stuff going on, and so I had this sort of, I suppose at Warwick, it must have been around that time that I started to think I'd love to write for theatre, because I was studying it as part of my degree, and I loved the early modern period. And theatre had its golden age in the early modern period, so there was a lot of theatre on my course. And we also looked at the ancient Greeks and modern stuff, where Edward Bond, who's quite a strange, fascinating late 20th century playwright who actually came to Warwick when I was there, and I met him, and he was really lovely and terrifying, but really encouraging. And so the two things were sort of coming together, that I was working at a theatre, seeing everything, and also studying the history. And I've always loved the sound of words and the idea of storytelling in its purest form being someone standing up in a cave by a fire and making the winter night pass a little bit quicker. So I think all of those things together, it's probably at Warwick that I first thought to myself, I should have a go at writing a play.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. So yeah, sitting on a button so all the lights don't go off. That's no pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also we see all sorts of weird things when you're a steward. And one of the things I love about theatre is that it is this marriage of pragmatism and poetry. So you have the beauty of the story, or the complexity, the sophistication of the storytelling, on a technical level. But then you've also got problems like that, like, okay, well, how do we do this without the house burning down? How do we do this? You know, how do we get this person from this side of the stage to this side of the stage? Is there time for a costume change? So I've always loved the challenge of writing for physical bodies in a physical space.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh no, thank you for that. That's really fascinating. So, For those of us, I mean, we've lightly touched on witches and shoes, but for those of us who aren't familiar, the early modern period is roughly 1500 to 1700s. Yeah, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong as well, Rebecca. Go for it. A lot of upheaval occurred during this period when England was flip-flopping between queens and kings who happened to be a different denomination of Christianity. And your luck would change depending on who was on the throne. And that's like Henry VII, Henry VIII, Cromwell, to name a few. We had plagues, witch hunts, civil war, flip-flopping between Church of England and the Pope, and of course theatres closing and opening depending on who was in charge. So what made you think that is going to be an interesting backdrop to study? What made you think I want to specialise in that for my PhD?
It's a really good question. And again, I think it probably all goes back to Warwick, because when you're doing an undergraduate degree in English literature, you usually get a good overview chronologically of everything from, depending on the degree, some degrees start with Old English, some start with Middle English, but you sort of start off with a very linguistic understanding of the history of the language itself and how it's changed over time. And you have to learn about things like the Great Vowel Shift and how double negatives used to be a thing in Middle English and they're not anymore. And then it gets increasingly towards the modern end of the degree. You don't have to do that kind of stuff anymore. So you're doing a lot more sort of philosophical, critical, a much more modern lens, where you're looking at a text through a sort of Derridian or Lacanian, and I hated all of that. I love the history. I love feeling like we've dug up these little artifacts of human thought and storytelling, and we are trying to, and we're using those imaginative artifacts to understand people then and now. And I think the early modern period was a nice balance of the two things. It was kind of right in the middle of the chronology, and it was still very. It still felt like it was a very historical focus, but also there's just so many interesting ideas being born, being explored in the early modern period. I think it's the age when we have our golden age of theatre. So we get these big theatres being built, purpose built for the first time, like the Globe. These open air theatres, which were bigger and more impressive than anything that had come before. It's a bit like the advent of cinema. We've got the printing press. It's revolutionizing the transmission of information, a bit like the internet has done for us in our life. And like you say, there's just so much going on. Doesn't it sound fun? You've got all sorts of things. You've got the Reformation, you've got the Civil War, bizarre ideas of being tested. What if we didn't have a king? What if we what if we tried to blow up the king? What if witches are real? What if they're not? There's all sorts of fascinating ideas. And also, I come from my family background was that my parents are very evangelical Christians, so they believed in things that most people in the UK don't believe in anymore, but that everybody believed in the early modern period. So I think I also found these discussions of demons and the dangers of demons was discussions that were very real for me when I was growing up. And I'm an agnostic atheist now. I don't have the same faith that they do, but I'm fascinated by the history of faith, and this is an interesting period for that. So loads and loads of reasons, Hannah. That was a convoluted answer, but all of that together.
No, that was a good answer. I mean, I'm just thinking about like Faustus. I'm just thinking about even on the back of Cromwell closing all the theatres, but theatre kind of felt like fighting back against the conservatism or the Puritanism.
Yeah, well, there's always been a tension between the two, because the Puritans closed the theatres. The parliamentarians from I think 1642 to about 1660, and then theatre comes back with a vengeance and with actresses for the first time. So we get then a new revolution in sort of progressiveness, permissiveness, also heralded by the stage.
Yeah, no, it's a very exciting time to focus on. What is your favourite early modern play?
Oh, this is hard. I had to think about this one. it's hard because it's in a way it's going to be something obvious like the Scottish play or I think of all Shakespeare's plays I think actually I watched Othello recently and was just struck again by how sort of perfectly structured that story is. There's not really a B plot in Othello. It's very succinct. I like quite succinct stories sometimes that just say this is a study in how jealousy destroys a man, or this is a study in this particular idea, and we're gonna and it's just gonna break your heart. The last scenes of Othello are so sad, and Emilia is a great character. So I've always loved. Lots of Shakespeare. But then I love the messiness of plays like The Alchemist, which are quite hard to understand. Ben Jonson's The Alchemist, which is very topical and witty, but hasn't aged as well as Shakespeare for that reason. Lots of the early city comedies, which are sort of funny if you know early modern English life, but hard to explain to modern audiences. I think my pick though is Beaumont's The Night of the Burning Pestle. I don't know if you know that one, Hannah.
I don't know that one. No. What's that
it's
one about?
It's great fun. So it's very it's a comedy. I think it's from 1607 if I remember off the top of my head. It's around that kind of time. So we're in Shakespeare's lifetime. But this isn't Shakespeare. This is another of the playwriting lads who were big at the time. And he writes this play which is kind of about what it means to put on a play, and it's sort of a pantomime. It's sort of a play that goes wrong. It's very meta theatrical, and it's great for a historian of theatre because it shows you so much about the mechanics of how audiences expected plays to be and how plays were performed. So basically, there's this company that are putting on a play. It's a comedy. It's a sort of genteel city comedy about people and people who look and sound like the audience members themselves. It's sort of topical and to my mind maybe a romance. Like, it's been a while since I read it. But then as they're beginning to introduce the play, a grocer and his wife in the audience stand up and start to demand that they include their apprentice, Rafe, who's a great actor. You'll love him. He does great characters. Put him in the play. Let him play a knight. And then there's this sort of strange Monty Python-esque Arthurian knight story trying to fit itself into a play that the rest of the company is trying to perform. So it's like the audience and the actors are kind of fighting each other to perform slightly different plays, and you end up with all these bizarre, incongruous scenes where someone will be having a conversation about a marriage that's going to come up, and then this knight will come on, ready to joust some giants, and it's really silly, but it's really good fun, and it's hard to do well. But there was a very good production at the Wanamaker Theatre a few years ago. Which was just one of the funniest things I've ever seen in the theatre, and the laughter in the room was wonderful to kind of feel. So actually, I think as a theatrical artifact, The Night of the Burning Pestle is probably my favourite. It's not the best, it's not the most sophisticated, but it is brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry. I feel like that's sometimes about like books I like and everyone else is like, oh, badly written. Yeah, no, it sounds like loads of fun, and I've never heard of it before. So, and I supposedly have a master's in English literature, but I've never heard of him.
It's rarely performed and rarely talked about, but I actually did. I got commissioned to write a pantomime for the Scottish Storytelling Centre in Edinburgh, and I just did an adaptation of. I said to them, can I do an adaptation of a really funny old play that is basically a pantomime? And they said, whatever, we just need something to perform. And it went down really well. It was pretty, because it's a funny play. You don't need to do very much with it to make it funny to a modern audience as well. So I think it's a bit neglected.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. It sounds like a good laugh. But I'll have to look that one up. See if it's coming to town anytime soon. So why did you choose to write horror moments? Why did you choose horror? Why is that your thing?
Yeah, I love the horror genre. I came to horror a bit late in life because, again, having the upbringing that I had, horror wasn't really welcomed into the house. We had plenty of scary things that we were supposed to be afraid of that were, genuine supernatural threats. So I sort of grew up with demons being real. But in terms of actually having, sitting and reading Edgar Allan Poe or something. My parents were a bit suspicious of things like that. So if I was doing that, I was doing that at school in the library rather than at home. And that meant that I didn't watch horror films, for a long time. It was like most of my early interactions with horror were in written form, right? The history in great literature. So I could maybe get by with reading The Signal Man and Whistle and I'll Come to You and all those sorts of, because that was literature. But film, no, there wasn't a single horror film in the house. And when I went to uni, I started watching horror films with my friends, and I remember watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and thinking, this isn't at all what I was expecting it to be, and it's great, and I love it. And I think I love horror films, and ever since then, I've just been obsessed. And I think it's interesting to wonder, and maybe you've got an answer for this as well, Hannah, but I think it's partly taste. I think I'm partly just a bit morbid, but I also think it's that horror for me contains so many other genres. You get everything in horror. You can have a beautiful, moving romance like The Fly, which is a story about disease and decay and loving somebody even though their body is betraying them, and you get action, you get sci-fi, you get, comedy. American Werewolf is very funny and very sad. I think horror can just do everything, a bit of everything, and it can be as highbrow and as lowbrow as you like. So, that like over the last couple of days, we've just been queuing up some films we've been meaning to watch for a while. We watched Deliverance, which is sort of a horror film, and then Dark Star the next day, which is a very bizarre, those films. It's a really jarring contrast. One is, a really serious exploration of mankind's capacity for brutality and the sort of indifference of nature, and then the next one is this zany sci-fi romp with a brilliant bizarre alien that looks like a beach ball, and you get everything in horror. Horror suits you whatever mood you're in, I think. So it is partly taste, but it's such a brilliant, diverse genre, I think. What about you, Hannah? Is that how you feel?
That is definitely how I feel. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, it's not as. I mean, you've got your slasher films and such, but yeah, when you write horror, you can write loads of subgenres into that. Like, well, I would like to think so, but I thought I had quite a nice like love story going on in The Spider, or it was a little bit police procedural as well as haunted house. You can add these things in and give the characters the whole whole new story just for them, with the horror as the backdrop if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that you can put horror in loads of different genres, and also it accidentally finds its way into genres as well.
Definitely.
There was a bit in Oceanus that I thought slipped into horror a bit more than sci-fi, but it's fine, it fits, it goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, horror definitely has, well, it just gets everywhere, doesn't it? Because I suppose being human, we all have a little bit of, superstition in us, and we all like a little bit of horror, whether we read or watch horror or not. We all like a little bit of it. So
absolutely.
I think you've picked a clever thing to focus on there for Dr. King's Curiosities, as the horror moments, and Wallace and Gromit as well. So we'll move on now to a little bit more about you as a person, as a writer, as a reader. So if you were stranded on a desert island, you have one book in your bag. What is it?
Oh, one book. It's a tough one, and the answer's gonna not in any way connect to anything I've said so far. But my favourite novel, my favourite novel of all time is Moby Dick. So I would have Moby Dick in my bag, definitely. It's just the most brilliant exercise in storytelling, which breaks all of the rules. It does everything you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
If you gave it to an editor or an AI, it would say, have you considered not doing any of this? But it's perfect. It's the story of a man trying to find a whale, and it's the story of every philosophical question that humans have ever asked. It's just the most wonderful thing, and it's got a great storyteller who's not necessarily unreliable, but is himself. His narration is part of the joy. The digressions, the rambles, the little potted theories he has are part of the joy of the story. This isn't a narrator that you necessarily agree with all the time, but he's a funny character to spend time with. And it's got these moments of reflection contrasted with chapters that are just suddenly action-packed and the most exciting, scenes that I've ever read. The last few pages, I won't spoil it, but you're reading it thinking, how is this going to end? How is this still like? And it goes so quickly at the end, and then you go, whoa! I wasn't expecting it to end like that, and it's brilliant. It keeps you right until the last moment. It's the most exciting story. I love Moby Dick. I think it's perfect.
And when you say the exciting story, you don't mean the bit in the book where they just go into all of the different facts about the different whales.
Well, that's the thing. No, exactly. It's got this wonderful frustration. There's an article I've been drafting for a completely different text where I'm talking about this sort of concept. I don't know if there's a name for this already, but I've sort of called it metatextual fatigue, where you're sort of deliberately provoking and annoying the reader. You're doing things like forcing them to read through a really long description that's sort of objectively quite dull, or at first glance is quite dull, but you're doing it for a reason. And I think I talked about Emma and how there's this wonderful, Austen really understands how to make you bored on purpose, because that boring character is going to be important later on, and you've got to feel annoyed by her in order for you to be sort of embroiled in something cruel that happens later on. So I think Moby Dick is a great story for that. It's an exercise in these sort of meta narrative tricks that it plays on you, that you're sitting there with this description of the skull and how that reflects something that Ishmael's been thinking about, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you get this absolutely brilliant speech from Ahab, or you get this extraordinary moment of chasing something in a boat, and it's the best. I love it.
I tried to do that with Coffee and the Spider, and so far it's only worked on my husband, because he was like, why are they making us just wait to have coffee? Like, shouldn't he be getting on with this?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, but you just wait till he's had that coffee.
Yeah,
it was important.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go, that's really brilliant. For me, that's brilliant writing. Good writing is functional, and then great writing breaks the rules in ways that you look back on and realize were impactful in an incredibly unexpected way. That sounds great.
Why do we all stop him for coffee when there's an investigation to do?
Yeah.
It's important. Just sit down and let him have coffee. Yeah. But that's really interesting. I'd like to. I don't know. Is that a paper that's going to be going in a journal, or
No. At the moment, it's just a Substack article. But it's the kind of thing that one of my goals for 2025 is going to be to just chop up my thesis and all these ideas I've been working on and actually send them off to journals, because I've really neglected writing for journals, because I've quite frankly found it just not as rewarding as writing for an audience of some kind, whether it's theatre or Substack. But I've had enough time between me and my PhD now. I had my Viva about this time last year, so it's been long enough now that I can kind of I can stand the thought of exactly, going and chopping bits out and actually trying to present some of them as standalone academic pieces.
Oh, well, I can't wait to see those. So I was actually going to ask you. So your posts on Substack are very entertaining as well as informative. What's next in the pipeline? Now, you've just said about your PhD, but we could just look at the rest of 2024, because there's not much left, but you've probably got a couple of things in the pipeline, surely.
Yeah, I do. Well, I'm finishing this current series of horror moments. So the way that horror moments works, as I know that you know, Hannah, is that they come in batches, they come in seasons. So typically 10 articles on horror moments in a particular thing. So first of all, it was Wallace and Gromit. So there were 10 articles on things that Wallace and Gromit references that are interesting jumping off points for talking about loads of different horror things. And then the next series has been Shakespeare, so I'm quite far through that now. We've just had the first of 4 articles on Titus Andronicus, which is Shakespeare's glorious play.
Yeah.
So there's going to be more. This is the thing, is loads of people say to me, oh, that's my favourite one, and no one agrees. And there's this little, it's like horror. There's this little community of people who love that play. There's a big overlap between people who are horror lovers and people who love Titus Andronicus, because it's basically the most horrific of the Shakespeare plays. But yeah, it does feel a bit like you're in this weird minority when you admit that you like it, because it is technically messier as well. It's not just that it's violent. It is an earlier Shakespeare play, and it's not as sophisticated as some of his later work. It's probably the result of co-authorship with lots of other younger playwrights or budding playwrights or lesser playwrights. So it is a bit messy, but I love it. It's a fascinating play. So and it's horrible. So there are 4 horror moments just from that. And then in the new year, there'll be a new series of horror moments in something else, which I hope everyone will enjoy. And then what else have I got going on? Well, today, I'm sure this will have come out by the time this comes out, but today I'm publishing on Simon Foreman, who's an astrologer who worked in early modern London and was consulted by lots of people who were involved in the theatre. So I'm talking about the connection between theatre and astrology at the time, which is quite fun. And I've got another quiz to come and a few other interesting articles. Bits and pieces. Monday's always the miscellaneous day. I think I've got another woodcut article for anyone who liked the one about Madge, the fortune-telling owl. There's one about Hocus Pocus, who was a real sleight of hand magician who worked in early modern England, and there's a wonderful book of woodcuts showing how he did his tricks. So I'm going to talk about that as well. Lots of stuff about magic and theatre and horror.
Oh, good. So yeah, you're not going anywhere soon, so that's
no.
great. But yeah, so that's what's next in the pipeline. Why are you here? What made you like start a Substack and say, I'm going to do this?
I wasn't planning to until about June or May this year, and I started in July. I think it was because, I handed in my PhD about September 2023. Then I had my Viva in December. There was a bit of a wait because of the marking strike, if anyone was following that. That slowed everything down in the academic world for a while. And then, so I didn't get to hand in my, I had minor corrections, which is 3 months. You get 3 months to just tweak little things like typos, and slightly adjust the way that you phrased things. So I had another 3 months to do that. So it wasn't until about kind of March time that I actually was handing in a really well proofread final version of my thesis with the adjustments that my examiners had suggested, ready to be printed. And it's not until you've got your printed thesis and you've submitted that you've sent that to the university library that you can have your degree. And then my degree ceremony was July. So I kind of had in my head like, okay, well, I've been doing all this work on my PhD, and now what? Now what am I going to do with all this knowledge that I have? And also just what am I going to do with all the hours in the day that I was using to research this book, basically? Writing a PhD is basically writing a book. So funnily enough, the amount of time that I invest in writing my Substack feels it's just far less arduous than doing a PhD. It's for a more public, popular audience. So it's not, I don't have to cite everything as efficiently as I do when I'm writing for an academic journal. I think it was just a replacement for all that energy I was pouring into the non-fiction stuff that I write. I've continued to do writing for the stage and other fiction stuff alongside, but it just filled the void. So I thought, I should just find a way of publishing articles on things I'm interested in, and Substack was just there, and it worked really nicely, and I liked it, and so I planned a batch of articles, and I decided after the Monday after my graduation would be my first article. So that's what happened. So I was officially Dr. King when I published my first one. That's why, really. It's just filling the void of having all this time, filling the void of the PhD.
You can tell it's your passion as well. You're very passionate about it, and that really does come through in your writing. So I thought, well, it'd be easy to talk to Dr. King about her work because she's passionate about it. So thank you for that. So while we're here as well, while I've still got you, which article do you have currently on Dr. King's Curiosities that you wish more people had read?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I think I don't really, I try not to pay too much attention to the numbers of, how popular or, in terms of things like likes. I feel like, some of the articles I write have more mass appeal and some of them are more niche, and that's okay. But I would like for people, I mean, my first articles, my first set of horror moments on Wallace and Gromit, I really enjoyed writing because I love Wallace and Gromit. And it was so fun to dig up or to realize actually just how horror literate those films are. And there's some shot for shot parodies of things like Ripley versus the Alien Queen from from Aliens is parodied in when Paella is fighting Fluffles in the big yellow baking forklift, and all sorts of things like that. I mean, slashers and the most obscure things. And I wrote about the way that vegetables are used in Foley for, when I was talking about were-rabbit, because Curse of the Were-Rabbit, I think Nick Park described it as the world's first vegetarian horror movie, but it has the same sound effects as real slashers, because it's always, if you've watched Barbarian Sound Studio, you'll know it's all, chopping cabbages and snapping carrots and things, has always been the sound of horror. So I talked about that. So I really enjoyed writing that, but my audience was much smaller, so I guess fewer people know about it. It's buried in the archive now, it's not on the front page anymore. So I would love for more people to go back and read those. My first ever one was about flaying because of Preston getting his skin removed in the knitomatic machine and being revealed to be something horrible underneath. So that was fun. So I'd love for people to go and read those just because they were right at the beginning, and I only had a handful of subscribers at the time. Yeah.
And are they still for? Can anybody go and read those?
Yeah, at the moment, everything on my Substack is completely free. I think it's all scheduled to go behind a paywall after a year at the moment. And I have some paying subscribers, which is incredible because I'm not at the moment offering them anything, which is really great. So it's amazing that people are supporting my work because it does help me carve out the time. But I do have ideas for things that I'd like to do for, that were maybe more hybrid, where there's a free and a paying element, just because it would be lovely to earn a living from writing in one way or another. This weird set of things that I'm interested in, that it doesn't lead naturally to a particular job. It's not like, oh, here you go, now you're perfect for being a historian of horror and magic. There you go. There's a whole industry of people who who need that work. It's very niche, and so it'd be lovely to just keep going and see where it goes. Really, I'm surprised at how warm and welcoming Substack has been, and people like yourself, Hannah, other creative, brilliant writers who've been there and commenting and sharing and all of that. It's lovely. I think I was a bit afraid of social media. I've never really been a social media person, and especially having come from certain platforms where they've just got worse and worse over time. It's been quite nice recently to be reminded of the fact that there are loads of lovely people on the internet who are just genuinely interested in engaging, whether or not they agree, but they're polite and interested.
You can have civil disagreements on
yeah,
Substack.
exactly.
Bit of bad behaviour recently with the that major election, but overall it's really nice. And what does help as well is when you write really good, engaging stuff, you're gonna find more people. So you deserve to be here. You deserve to be earning from your paid subscribers. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And it was lovely to get to catch you today. So on the post, I'll get the link to that first article for you on there as well, so more people will get to see it. So in case you didn't catch the beginning, that was Dr. Rebekah King, who writes Dr. King's Curiosities on Substack. Please do give it a subscribe because she's doing a great job. And that's it for this week in Scream Queens, Women in Horror. So thank